Okay, you're listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, and on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Emily Lualua of Make the Road, Pennsylvania. Councilmember Nicholas O'Rourke will join us to discuss his spring plans, and Lance Haver will share with us the dangers of cutting Medicare and Medicaid. Denise, how are you tonight? And I can't hear you, Denise. Maybe it's just me.
I'm sorry. I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. It's good to see you as always. And we got a packed show, so we're going to jump right into it. We did this interview with Councilmember O'Rourke earlier this week. And what we're going to do is, it's a longer interview, so we're going to play half tonight and half next week. So we'll do about the first 20 minutes tonight. And then we're going to, like I said, play the rest next week. It's really interesting. It's important to hear what he has to say. So here is our interview with Councilmember Nicholas O'Rourke. All right, Councilmember Nicholas O'Rourke, thank you so much for joining us.
Lawrence, I appreciate you having me on. It's an honor always to be with you and Denise.
Thank you so much. So can you tell us a little bit about your spring priorities for the fall council session?
Well, first of all, I am probably going to be a bit behind as it relates to the fall council session. As I'm looking forward to having, God willing, a child in May 23rd. My wife is expecting. And so we are looking forward to welcoming them into the world. And that's probably going to give me an opportunity to take some time to be with the family. And
Right.
so I think I'll be a little bit slow to the draw come September, but I look forward to jumping in with advancing a number of things. One, first of all, let me just say that we want to continue to be spending time letting the city know about our recently passed rental price fixing ban. One of the things that I've learned in 1 year of being a lawmaker, an ordinance maker of sorts, I guess, is that there is the work and the campaign that's put together to get a law enough support for it to be, or a bill enough support for it to become law, and then after that, getting folks to know that it exists. And how it impacts their life is also, I believe, should be a part of the work of this office. And so we are excited to say that our rental price fixing ban, which is my first actual bill as a lawmaker, is now in effect. It's a bill that creates a strong private right of action for tenants who find their landlord is using pricing algorithms that use private data. I think that even attention on algorithms in this era is something that more lawmakers should be paying attention to or should be giving, in that algorithms are literally shaping reality, to say nothing of the way that we literally live. At this point, it actually is a tool that has been recognized even by the federal government that has contributed to price gouging. And so my office is glad to be partnering with the Public Interest Law Center and Francis Melman Sulimas, which is a consumer protection firm, to help out tenants who think that they may have been impacted. That is something that we are going to be actively sharing out, speaking with tenants across the city, letting them know that this particular tool, as tenants, as renters, y'all know about nearly half the city rents. It's almost like every other person you see is a renter, that they have this particular tool in their toolbox to be able to have some protections and to push back against what might be predatory landlords. But beyond that, in the coming weeks, I'll be putting forward some new legislation to further aid tenants, which I think of as sort of a companion to the Power Act that Leader Brooks introduced a few weeks ago. Like the Power Act does with our labor laws, this particular effort that we'll be working on will aim to adjust measures already spelled out in the code, along with including some new elements. Another similarity is the anti-retaliation piece. The Power Act aims to protect workers from backlash when they demand their fair treatment. Our coming work in our office will guard against landlords retaliating against their tenants for exercising their right to organize. You listeners may have heard recently, was it in New Mexico? It's escaping me right now what state it was in, but there was a particular landlord or owner that was charged for basically threatening to deport those who were in their in their housing. And so we want to make sure, again, along that same line, being mindful of, as a independent with the WFP, we have this phrase we say all the time: for the many, not the few. If I say half the city rents, and we're trying to make sure that we're working for the working class and the working poor, and for the many, which is the case for them, that this seems like something that we should be doing, prioritizing providing tools for renters across the city to be able to live well. So that's kind of some of the stuff that's on the top of our mind. There's our minds are always open, and we are interested in doing things that are going to measurably and materially improve the lives of working people. I don't mean to just throw that as a line, but it really does drive. It is the mission of our office. It really does drive how we approach lawmaking, and what we're open to advancing when other ideas come across our table.
All right. And before we move on, I just want to say congratulations on the birth of the child. And just remember that Lawrence is an underused and underutilized name. So I just want to throw that out there, Council.
That's a good plug because we're trying to figure one out.
There you go. But with a W, not a U. That's very important.
With the W, okay.
So the next big thing on the horizon is the budget.
Yeah.
And before we start talking about that specifically, I just wanted to ask you, have you had a chance to take a look at the Tax Reform Commission report yet?
I haven't seen all of it through. I
Yeah.
have a staff that has, and we have begun conversations. I don't want to pretend to be an expert on it all. A lot of things I'm juggling in my personal life, but it is part of what we are consuming at this time and preparing ourselves for that particular discussion.
One of the things that they had mentioned in there is eventually trying to cut the entire business tax out.
Mhm.
At a time like this specifically, when we're worried about federal funding, it doesn't seem right. But just generally speaking, when we talk about revenue and where it's coming from and what we're trying to do, do you think that cutting the taxes and hoping that it leads to more of a tax base is a useful thing to be thinking about? Or has that been tried and we haven't really seen the results?
I'm going to respond to this question. I would say that, let me ground myself here. Right now, working families in Philadelphia, and I say working families, literal actual working families, not my party, but the actual working families of Philadelphia are struggling. People are feeling squeezed, not just economically, but also by fear, the fear of austerity-driven service cuts. Some of that stuff ain't just a fear, it's reality at the moment. Fear of an increasingly militarized police state, fear of an uncertain future with, I mean, I hear more and more folks talk about not really knowing what the future holds, what's going to happen next. I had one of my ledge director's mother was here from North Carolina yesterday, and she, as a longtime educator, was talking about that. I really do not know what is going to happen. Well, no one knows if they cut the department, if they're able to actually kind of gut the Department of Education. We know that it takes Congress to kind of kill it, but that's a real fear, the fear of an uncertain future, as well as the fear of the erosion of our democracy. In this particular season of hard choices, we're making a conscious decision to invest in the people of Philadelphia. And we want to reject the false choice between fiscal responsibility and meeting human needs, which is often kind of pitted each other in stumping and speech making. I hear it all the time, and I think it has a way of eroding on people's imagination. And we want to be intentional about kind of cutting through that. I do not believe that austerity measures is the way that we ought to be going. We are one of the most wealthy countries on the planet. I think we have to be prioritizing what we believe is recognizing and remembering what is valuable in our city. This is not to denigrate businesses. This is not to denigrate business and that culture, entrepreneurship, whatever the case may be. It is, I believe, I'm not elected by businesses. I'm elected by people who have needs. And so my advocacy will be going towards prioritizing first and foremost and forefront the real material needs of working people and making sure that we're allocating and prioritizing allocation of funds towards them. So I say that to say that, just kind of zooming out a bit, the overarching aims for our office this budget season is going to be about protecting our city from service cuts that would further destabilize the working families of Philadelphia, fighting for long-term investments that'll secure Philadelphia's future, which is fully funded schools. We need those, always have. Strong public transit, safe and affordable housing, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, good union jobs, right? Classic, good quality labor, progressive stuff. It means prioritizing or aiming at leading with clarity, leading with ambition, leading with engagement, bringing our colleagues, our unions, our grassroots movements, the remnants of them, and some of them that are being born right now in the midst of this new wave of resistance into the fight, and defending and strengthening local democracy by demanding a budget process that is transparent, that is participatory, that is accountable to working people, not just the corporate interests, not just the political insiders. And I believe that we need to be doing that in this time because of what we've seen in the last few months. Was it March right now? It's probably more than the last few months. I want to kind of make a point around the attention and the legislative air that was sucked out in the midst of an arena fight that flopped. And I think that it's important for us to recognize when the people, by and large, see how much private interests, corporate interests seem to dictate the decisions of lawmakers. Whether folks have, you know, I don't want to dismiss people's arguments for the arena. I wasn't, as I said, I tried to say a lot. It wasn't even that I was so much anti-arena. I was just pro the community. It's not that I didn't want things to be built, but if the community that's sitting there telling you they don't want it has been saying it for X number of years,
Right.
it ought to matter to us. So I'm just saying that it seems important to me that if we care about democracy and engendering and re-engendering a sense of trust and faith in the institutions that still exist, that we ought to do our due diligence to communicate something different that feels different to the community, that lets them know that our number one priority isn't, you know, I mean, so we're going to create jobs by austerity measures. We got to make sure that we are investing in our people and they can see and feel that. So that's, I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's, I'm trying to give you a wider swath so you can kind of at least feel where I fit in there.
Yep. Yep. You had said something, I believe it was your first day in council, where you talked about getting, I think you literally said, let's get money into the hands of Philadelphians.
Yes, yes.
And
Money in people's pockets.
that's exactly it. And
Yeah,
that's, no one had ever said that before. And a light bulb went off. And well, that's the way you do it. That's how you get the economy going again.
yeah.
Um,
Give people money.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. Absolutely right. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about the hearing on the detention center. That was legislation you would put up to have this hearing.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how that came about and what the results of that hearing were for you.
Sure. Yeah. So I have, well before the people elected me to this 4-year term as a councilman at large, have been a minister. That is, I am as the nomenclature for our tradition is, we are called into this particular vocation of ministry. I do pastor a small church, but I was also an organizer. So even in my organizing and in my activism, it was kind of laced with the faith context. And there's um, a a a uh, a oft quoted scripture in the Christian New Testament of basically the context is he's coming of age, and he's about to begin his ministry, and he pulls the scroll when he's in the synagogue of the book of the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah, I think it's like the 61st chapter, and he basically reads from it. And in that passage, and you can find this in Luke chapter 4, I think 18. Um, Basically, it says he reads, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor, um, set at liberty those who are captive, um, uh, good news to the oppressed, and speak to the year of the Lord's favor. But set at liberty those who are oppressed, or set the captive free, is essentially one of the line marks of the way that this person who a whole religion was kind of built around started his ministry. So I say that to say that at base of what I believe ministry is, what um, what is important as it relates to doing justice in our society is about setting the captive free, setting those who are oppressed, those who are behind the wall, those who don't need to be there. Uh, we had we had, to your point, a decarceration hearing as a result of, and I know that it's not the only one, there have been others, but Philadelphia was forced to set aside about $25 million for the Remick settlement, where basically the prison conditions were so deplorable that we needed to depopulate. We had to decarcerate. That was what the federal monitor said that we need to do in order for us to be able to have um, prisons, jails that were humane, that were conducive for human beings to be living in. Um, so, to me, right, when I hear that the way that we're treating our incarcerated neighbors is that we are submitting them to, I'll use the term dungeons, right? Functionally so. That is inhumane. That's unjust. That cuts at kind of my moral, and that matters to me. Other folks, politics are informed by other things. I make no apologies about wanting to prioritize caring about the humanity of people and setting the captive free. A couple of the highlights I would say that came out of that hearing that I think are worth noting is that the prisons commissioner, Commissioner Resnick, who is the new prison commissioner, we ought to acknowledge that he's only been here since, I guess it'll be a year next month. He got here, I think, in April of last year. He noted that 43% of the people released from the PDP in the average month have a stay of less than 2 weeks,
Yep.
14 days, right? Roughly. He described that as wasteful.
Yeah.
The prison commissioner, right? Um, the DA in that same hearing, District Attorney Larry Krasner, once again pointed to the bail hearing commissioners, the unelected staff at the First Judicial District, the FJD, who actually set the bail as a stealth force, excuse me, a stealth force that's contributing to the problems on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the crisis on State Road as a staffing ratio problem here, right? We are talking about a situation where you have not enough prison guards. We have too many prisoners. There are the ratio is off, and it's an issue that we really can't hire our way out of because there's an expectation that we depopulate in order to be able to meet the metric of that settlement. So, I find that to be uh, important notes to pay attention to if we are trying to, again, I use this term intentionally, materially, and I dare say measurably improve the lives of people in the city of Philadelphia. Those who are behind the wall, they are still citizens. And so I think we ought to take note of those sorts of things. That if we're going to be able to reduce the prison population, we got to figure out why we keep putting people in there for less than 2 week stays, when if they're in there for less than 2 weeks, the question immediately becomes, should they have been there in the first place?
Right.
We keep putting them in there. That costs money. And I need people to remember that more quickly, right? That especially for those who are bloodthirsty for tough on crime and this and that. If you're in there for 14 days, it couldn't have been that. The crime probably wasn't big enough for us to spend X amount of dollars, especially at a time when folks are trying to talk about austerity because funding cuts, this and that. So, anyways, not to belabor the point too much, but I thought a lot came out of that to help us remember that we need to drastically change some things as it relates to our prisons, as it relates to our jails, and recognize that we're not going to hire our way out of it, that we have to make sure that we see some improvements in the conditions of the prisons. And I do want to give at least a little bit of a hat tip to the commissioner. I do believe that there have been improvements. I know when I walked through one of the spaces late last year, there was not air conditioning in all the spaces. Now there is in one of the centers, and so those sorts of things matter to me. I want to make sure that we acknowledge that because improvement, we need to acknowledge it as it comes along. But there's so much more that we need to do, and so I look forward to continually raising the alarm on that. And I just want to say before I shut up that I appreciate Councilman Jones chairing the meeting, Councilman Thomas for him even this is work that he had been working on prior to allowing my new freshman self and our team to kind of get in here and to help figure out how best to serve our people right on this particular topic.
All right. right, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor. Denise, can you hear us there? I think you're muted. All right, we'd like to thank Councilmember O'Rourke for being with us. That was a good place to cut. We'll play the rest of that interview next week with Councilmember O'Rourke. We would like to thank him, and we'll see more from him next week. Now I'd like to bring in Lance Haver to tell us a little bit about something that I'm very concerned about, and I think a lot of us are, the potential cuts to Medicaid and Medicare.
Good evening. That was a really interesting interview, and congratulations to the council member on his new baby. Lawrence is a name that has not been used quite a while. But I really want to talk a little bit about what some people perceive to be President Trump's statements. So President Trump has said as a candidate he was not going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. He's now saying something slightly different. He's saying he's not going to cut it. He's just going to eliminate the waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think we should recognize that to a large extent, that is a good goal. The goal of eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse is something that we should all support. And that's not really the question. Should we cut that? Should we eliminate it? Should we look at how many corporations have captured our regulatory bodies and found ways of getting away with stealing taxpayers' money? And I say stealing, I mean that figuratively, not literally. I don't mean as a criminal act, I meant as a moral act. The question is, how do you do that? How is it that you go ahead and you make sure that people are now going to be examining where the waste is, where the abuse is, and where the fraud is? And that's what I think people don't understand. So let's look at the two ways that that can happen. First way that can happen is an across-the-board cut, which is what President Trump and Dodge are saying. They're just going to make some arbitrary number and say, we're going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security by 20%, and we're going to let somebody else figure out where the fraud, waste, and abuse is. The other way of doing it is to actually study the programs to see who's getting the benefits and who isn't, to see whether the money is sufficient where it's going or where it needs to be redirected, and to see who's really getting away with those payments. Let me give you a concrete example. We know now that a lot of the pharmacies have managers who are making literally hundreds of millions of dollars by raising the price of medications. And there's an example of abuse, of fraud, whether you want to call it thievery or you want to say it's criminal. I think that's really not helpful. But I think we can look at that and say there's a place to cut. But if the approach is to simply cut 20% across the board, that's not going to eliminate the powerful corporations from getting in there in closed sessions and continuing to get their payments. Yes, instead of getting $1 billion, they may only get $950 million, but that's still $950 million going to the wrong place. And I say that because when President Trump, during his first term, he didn't address the issue of waste and abuse and fraud. Instead, he spent almost all of his time really looking at the Affordable Care Act, which is commonly referred to as Obamacare, and saying he was going to eliminate that. Well, again, those type of statements that you're going to just eliminate an entire program without having something in place, without addressing the problems, means that there's going to be a tremendous amount of suffering that happens. There is, under the Department of Justice, an entire division that prosecutes people for Medicare and Medicaid fraud, and they have been doing that for the last 29 years. Now, I will say what they have been doing is insufficient. They don't do enough. There are what are called inspector generals. Each one of the government programs has somebody who is supposed to be investigating abuses, money being poorly spent. When President Trump first took office, one of the first things he did was eliminate all the inspector generals, some of which had investigated his cabinet members when he was president in the past, some of which said they were going to investigate some of the current cabinet members, including Mr. Musk. So President Trump's solution to that problem was to eliminate the internal controls, to do away with the guardrails, not to say, we've got to be better at rooting out abuse and fraud. We have to make sure that the people who need the programs are getting the benefits and not the corporations. And again, a concrete example is many doctors now are working for corporations, and the Medicare and Medicaid payments and insurance payments go to the corporations, and then the corporations pay the doctors. And what we're not looking at as a society is how these corporations are skimming. And again, I don't mean it criminally. I just mean taking money from the payments across the top that don't go to basic service providers, but go to the programs that the corporations run. So that's really what I'm talking about. What really the concern is that, yes, we have to do a better job of stopping the corporations from taking the top off of the money, from putting it in their pockets, from enriching themselves and their stockholders at the expense of people who need these services. That being said, just eliminating 20 or 25 or 30% won't do that. All it will do is allow the people who are skimming, taking the money off the top, to continue to take it because they won't be prosecuted, they won't be rooted out, there'll be no new rules to contain them. It'll just be less money to go around. And just to be clear on who's going to suffer, I want to go through some of the facts. And it's really kind of sad when we think about who's going to be suffering the most. And maybe I could get a little help calling up the, there we go, thanks. So, Medicaid, I think almost everyone knows what Medicare is. Medicare is the program that helps people who are 65 or older. It's gotten so confusing, though, that we're not going to talk about it tonight, but it's gotten so confusing that there's not one, there's not two, there's not three, but there's 4 distinct programs for Medicare. And people who are younger than 65 often think that Medicare is free. As someone who's over 65, I will tell you it is not free. People pay for Medicare, Part A and Part B, and then if you don't buy a supplement, you could go bankrupt if you get ill. And if you don't buy an additional coverage plan to pay for your medications, what the doctor prescribes for you may be outside of your financial ability. But it's mostly people who are 65 or older who are getting Medicare. Medicaid is a program that was developed to basically help the working poor who are working in industries where the people did not get health insurance. In America, unlike other countries, we don't have a national health care plan. We have a plan where most people were getting their health insurance from their employer. And as the employers decided to enrich themselves and increase their profits, they did a number of things. One of the things they did was eliminate defined benefit pensions, so no longer could retirees expect a certain amount every month. They also did away with health care. So Medicaid has taken up some of that under the Affordable Care Act. And from this slide, which all comes from a foundation, you can see as of August of 2024, there were over 3 million Pennsylvanians who were getting Medicaid. That's not Medicare, again. It's not for the seniors, that's for Medicaid. 26% of those people were low income. 21% of the population is covered by the Medicare CHIP program. So you can see that the millions and millions of people who are receiving it because they can't get health insurance any other place. And so, again, to look at the coverage, 1 in 6 adults from 19 to 64 get it. 3 in 8 children, 5 in 8 nursing home residents. And again, I want to be very clear about this. Right now, the cost of dying is so high and so expensive that people who get sick end up losing their entire life savings. Unlike in past generations when there was intergenerational wealth, where your parents and grandparents worked hard, bought a house, saved the house, passed it down to the next generation, so the next generation could send their kids to college, could start a business, could have a down payment for a house. The cost of dying has become so expensive that the nursing homes require you to sign over your house to them to be able to get the care. So the traditional intergenerational wealth, which has helped lift families out of poverty, is no longer there. So 5 in 8 people in nursing home residence are getting their coverage, their health care coverage in the nursing home, paid for by Medicare. 1 in 6 Medicare beneficiaries, and here's where, again, what I want to make it clear. 49% of the non-elderly Medicaid enrollees in PA are people of color. The majority are white. I'm going to say it again, the spinning often comes that the majority of people getting SNAP, which is the name for the new food stamp program, or getting Medicare, are people of color. That isn't true. It's not true in Pennsylvania. It's not true on a national level. Yes, you can find pockets where that is true, but in those pockets, you'll find a very significant African American or Latino population. But if you look at the entire population, you will see that the majority of people on getting these benefits of these programs are white people who have fallen below a working class life. Now, I know there are some people who say, well, we really ought to require people to work for these benefits. Well, 61% of the adults who are getting the benefit are working. Of the 39% who aren't, most of them are elderly or children or have disabilities, so they can't work. The idea that there's this huge welfare payment out there, that people are getting rich and buying cars or living the good life on welfare, is a complete fabrication. It's just an outright lie. It doesn't happen. It's not there. These benefits aren't very much, and they're very limited. So the most significant thing that people don't think about is that babies, newborns, the council member was talking about, now his family will be lucky, he'll have good quality health care. But 34% of all births in Pennsylvania are covered by Medicaid. And for the next year, as the mom and the baby get the care, that's covered by Medicaid. So you see 21% of the women nationally, 23% in Pennsylvania, get their medical coverage from Medicaid. Again, these are the people who are going to be affected by the cuts. And finally, I know people say, well, it's those people, quote unquote, those people. Those people are going to lose out. Well, unfortunately, even if you have no compassion for the working poor, if you're not angry that companies like CVS and other major retailers take advantage of the government's programs so they can pay their workers less. Again, let's be very clear. Walmart couldn't pay workers as little as it pays them if it wasn't for the food stamp program SNAP, if it wasn't for LAHEAP that helps people pay their utility bills, if it wasn't for Medicare and Medicaid that help people pay their health insurance. So all of these programs, which do help people and are necessary, are really huge, huge benefits to corporate America to allow them to pay people a non-living wage. What's missing from the living wage at Walmart is made up for by middle-class taxpayers supporting SNAP, the food stamp program, LAHEAP, and other programs. But if we cut Medicare and Medicaid without thinking about it, again, if we look at it and we figure out what's the waste, how can we root out the crooks? How do we get rid of these people who do double and triple billing, who claim that they're servicing people who aren't getting serviced? If we don't do that, we just cut across the board. What's going to happen is community hospitals will close. And those of us who have spent most of our lives living in cities and around cities may not understand this. But as someone who grew up, as I like to say, a little bit left of nowhere, the community hospital can be the biggest institution in your county. The county seat is where government is. It's one of the few towns in Elk County or Potter County or in any rural county that's still active because the government's there. The community hospital is there. The community hospital relies on Medicare and Medicaid payments. Over the last 20 years, there have been 148 hospital and merger acquisitions in communities across Pennsylvania. 32 hospitals have closed completely, and 25 have shut down key services. If we eliminate Medicare and Medicaid, 30% of it, a significant number of these hospitals will close. And what that means is even if you have good health insurance and even if you have access to a good medical benefit plan, your local hospital may close. And here's why that's significant. It's not simply that you'll have to drive another hour to get your tests done, to get your MRI or to get your blood work done or whatever. It's that if you have an emergency, you will die. And I know people don't like to hear things like that. They think it's alarmist. But I'm going to point out that we now know, we as a society now know that if you have a stroke, if we get you to the emergency room in a short period of time, we can dissolve the blood clot most of the time and make sure there's no brain damage. We now know for most heart attacks, if we get you to the emergency room in a reasonable amount of time, we can dissolve the clot, we can save your life. But if you live in a rural community, which most of which voted for President Trump, and your local hospital is closed, you're not going to get to that hospital in a reasonable amount of time, even if you have health insurance, even if you have good health insurance, even if you have a good relationship with your pharmacy or your doctor. There simply will not be enough time to get you from your home to the hospital in the next county over to take care of you. And that's really what's at risk. Yeah, we can all be mad about the companies who are taking advantage of us, who are stealing the Medicare, Medicaid, and again, figuratively, not literally stealing the Medicare and Medicaid dollars. It's very upsetting. We should all be upset about that. We should all want to prosecute these guys who have figured out how to bill Medicare and Medicaid without providing the services. But eliminating 20% of it doesn't do that. Does nothing to prosecute the criminals, does nothing to get rid of the cheats, does nothing to resolve the problem. All it does is allow the crooks to continue skimming and make sure and create a situation where people will not get the help that they need. So yes, it's great when President Trump says he's going to cut the waste and abuse, but it's just not a very smart way of going about it by simply saying, we're not going to investigate, we're not going to study, we're not going to prosecute, we're simply going to give people 80 cents on a dollar and hope that something better will happen.
And Lance, you make a good point in terms of, explaining how this impacts particularly rural areas. There's a news outlet I read called Mississippi Today. And there are parts of Mississippi where if you have a heart attack, if you're having a baby and you have complications, or if you've been shot or any number of things, you're going to die because the nearest hospital is 2 hours away from you. And most of that is because this is one of those states that refused to take the Affordable Care Act money, which was used to keep hospitals afloat. But when you add what's about to happen with Medicaid to that, you're going to have a whole lot of people who are, leaving this planet unnecessarily. So hopefully someone will ask Dr. Mehmet Oz, the person who called himself running for Senate of Pennsylvania from his mansion in New Jersey, what he's going to do about that.
Right. I thank you for that about Mississippi, and it's not just Mississippi. I mean, even more affluent counties like Delco County is seeing the closure of 2 of their hospitals. Now, it's not clear what's going to happen to them, but this is not a poor neighbor. This is not a poor county. Delaware County is not poor by any stretch of the imagination compared to Mississippi or Louisiana or other rural areas, Potter County or Elk County or McKean County. But they're about to lose 2 of their hospitals. And this is not like Jefferson saying, well, you know, Mayor Parker, if you don't give us what we want, we're going to move our headquarters to Allentown. This is people not having services. This is what happens. The hospitals will be understaffed. They will not be able to get to people in the emergency room in a timely fashion. If you are hospitalized, the number of orderlies, the number of people who do the basic hard work of taking care of patients will be dramatically cut. And even if you have that health insurance, you're going to be the one who suffers. You're going to be the one who doesn't have an orderly or a nurse's aide or a nurse to help you get up out of the hospital bed. And we don't like to think about these things. And I understand why we don't like to think about it. It's very unpleasant. But if we're older and we're in a hospital bed and we don't get physical therapy, we lose the ability to walk. And then we have to go to a nursing home. And then the nursing home has all of its problems. But on top of everything else, there's no cost savings there. Having a physical therapist, having a nurse's aide, having someone coming in to get somebody out of bed, to walk around the hall so that they don't lose the strength in their legs, that is really a cost-saving thing. And we need to recognize that going after crooks isn't cutting the budget. Going after crooks is going after crooks. No one would say the way to solve the crime problem in Philadelphia is to cut the number of police, cut the police budget and cut the prison budget. No one would say that. People may say, well, that's, you know, you can end overpopulation in jails by cutting the prison budget. But realistically, what that does is it increases the overpopulation and it doesn't resolve the very significant problems.
Well,
And,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I'm hoping that the hospitals and the doctors and the nursing homes are going to come to the state capitol and start talking about what this means to them. Because right now, all it is people saying, I'm scared. And the people who are the Trump supporters and are angry about how regulatory bodies have been captured by corporations and how the corporate thieves have gotten away with so much seem to be thrilled that now someone's cutting the budget without understanding that that simply doesn't stop the thieves. Buying a less expensive car doesn't stop your car from getting stolen.
All right, Lance, thank you so much. And now we're going to go to our interview with Emily Lualua of the Make the Road PA group. All right, Emily Lualua of the Make the Road Pennsylvania. You're the lead Philadelphia organizer. How are you?
I'm good. How are you all doing?
Very well, thank you. And thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about Make the Road?
Yeah, so Make the Road, we actually started out in Reading, Pennsylvania. We have a mothership actually in New York. That's where it all started. But when we expanded to Pennsylvania, we started off in Reading. From there, we expanded to Allentown, then Philadelphia, and this past year, we expanded to Hazleton. So we are an organization that believes in community power. We're not a charity. We're directly organizing the community to arm themselves with knowledge and build that power of community trust to make sure that that decisions being made are being made by the people that are directly affected. When it comes to issues about like job security, working class, minimum wage, immigration is our big one, right? We are an immigrant-led org. And education, we have one of the worst public school systems in the United States. And we have really been advocating for a change in that realm.
I just have to mention this. My coal miner ancestors were from Hazleton. So I'm
Oh, really?
quite familiar. I've literally shoveled coal in
Oh,
Hazleton.
wow. Wow.
So what concerns you the most in Philadelphia right now?
Yeah. Um, I think if we're talking about the immediate concern, it's how our immigrant brothers and sisters are being treated and the narrative behind immigrants in general. We are being attacked and told that we are a danger to the community, that we are taking jobs from people. This is stuff coming from, the federal level. Language that's being pushed by our presidents that is infuriating Americans. And they're taking out all their anger and frustration on the immigrant community. It's always been a lot easier to blame and harass a group of people you don't know than the actual culprit that is causing the harm, which is the ultra rich, the elite. We've seen this historically happen for years. At one point it was the Irish, at another point it was the Italians, and at today in present day it is mostly Latino and Black immigrants that are really facing these terrible allegations. So it really comes down to how are people protecting themselves, to say the least. We have advocates and attorneys on our side helping us to in this push for this um, betterment of the immigrant people. But something that we've actually come to realize, not just like Make the Road, but multiple organizations that work with immigrant communities, is that there will never be enough advocates or immigration attorneys to help every single person that is experiencing deportation orders or run-ins with ICE. So it really comes down to educating the community, making sure that the community is looking out for each other, building that trust within neighbor and neighbor, so that we can combat it as a group of people together.
And, when we look at the landscape,
Mhm.
organizations like yours, the media, and just people in general, how do we begin to do that? And what should we be doing?
Yeah. So it's really and this is like as Americans, right? Or as okay. So it's important to have allies, for this. Like we can't be alone. Alone we're not going to do it, unfortunately. What allies can start doing definitely is going to these Know Your Rights workshops. Make the Road holds them once a month, but there are a bunch of organizations throughout Philadelphia that hold Know Your Rights workshops and are actually doing the work to make sure that not just affected peoples are knowing their rights, but that citizens are also ready and willing to step in to know the rights of immigrants so that we can stand up and defend immigrants ourselves, if that makes sense. Attend these Know Your Rights workshops, ask questions, extend that arm to your neighbor, have that conversation. Even if there is this language barrier, I'm telling you, we will find a way to be able to communicate with each other. And another big one is we started actually handing out Know Your Rights cards, the little red cards. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they have the basic rights of an undocumented person on one side and the other, both in Spanish and English, but you can find them in multiple languages at the Immigration Resource Center online. You can print those out on your own and cut them up and distribute them within your community on your own. We are asking American citizens to carry those cards in solidarity with immigrants. Something that we have been noticing is that the cards themselves, as helpful as they can also be a huge identifier that someone is undocumented. How do we combat this? Making sure that our neighbors that are American citizens or anyone that is our family member that's American citizen is also carrying that card. So that's something that's been really helping us, and we've been seeing people more than willingly being able to do that.
To me, it doesn't seem like we're seeing the same level of organizing and public participation that we saw during the first Trump administration. Is that your assessment as well? And will we start to see that?
Yeah, yes, to be very honest. But you can't really blame people because people are tired. Uh, People are exhausted. People are burnt out. Um, it's scary, you know. Um, I will say from the nonprofit world, us being in the nonprofit world, it has definitely been a challenge. But if anything, we've learned that hope and faith are definitely the two things that are keeping us going and keeping us in the movement. We ourselves have to believe that there will be an immediate change or a long-term change, but we have to believe that this better world or this better outcome for immigrants or whoever the affected peoples are at the time is possible and will happen. As long as we keep that drive alive, we can reignite those flames in people. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take some time, especially because people are very weary of people they don't know. Nowadays, we can blame COVID, we can blame lockdown, we can blame a lot of things. But I think as long as the organizers themselves, the community organizers themselves feel this fire and continue to have this faith that we can get there, we will get there. It doesn't matter if it takes 1 year, 2 years, whatever it is, we will be able to reignite that fire in people. It's just going to take time, but also being mindful that this is tiring. It's very much draining, and giving people the space and the time they need to recharge or do whatever it is they need to do for self-care so that when they're able to come back into the movement, they are able to pick up where they left off.
All right, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Home Monitor.
Hi, and thank you again, Emily, for giving us some of your time today. You mentioned burnout, and that's a real thing. But what I've also heard on a part of a lot of the activists with whom I communicate is that they're tired for a completely different reason.
Mm.
And that reason is they felt that this could have all been prevented if folks would have just followed them on election day. Are you hearing similar stuff to that when you go and approach people about, getting involved?
Yeah, yeah, that's a very, very big thing that still comes up as well.
But how do you handle that?
It's very difficult, honestly, to handle it because I found myself at the end of that stick as well at a certain point. I would say at the beginning of the year when everything was going down, you know. But what's at least I can only speak on behalf of myself at this moment. I think what kept me or what made me kind of wake up and realize that like I can't just like call it a day. I'm done. I like this, everything is messed up and it's going to be messed up and it is what it is. I had a very deep conversation with my parents. My parents were undocumented at one point. Both of them now have their documents, but definitely I had to find a way to ground myself again and why I do this work and why it's important and how, unfortunately, again, this is a long haul fight. This is not something that's going to be resolved overnight. And yes, it is, again, it is a lot easier to blame other people for the outcomes that we have currently. But I'm also a big believer in like, we live and we learn. And right now we're in the learning phase of what we are living. So if that's what it takes, if this is what it takes to wake people up and shake them up, to actually mobilize and organize, then that's what it's gonna take. But we can't just assume that nothing is, I don't know if I'm articulating myself correctly, but we can't just assume or that we're gonna put our batons down and that's just the way it's gonna be. We like that's a lot for me, far more dangerous than having our moment to feel burnt out and blame whoever it is that we feel like blaming in the moment, but we need to find our way back into the movement. We need to reground ourselves. And that is with having these conversations with people about why they feel frustrated, why these events carried out the way that they did, but reminding them to ground them in why it's still important for us to keep organizing. It's a long haul fight. It's always going to be a long haul fight. We're not always going to see immediate change. But that's exactly what they want us to do. They want us to get tired out. They want us to get burnt out. They want us to fight amongst each other so that we don't get anything done. That is the overall plan. And I don't want to say we're giving that to them right now. I do want to believe that people are just having their time to reflect on what happened and we'll get back into the fight when they need to. But yeah, I that's where I stand on that. I hope I answered your question as best
Well,
as I
yeah.
can.
Once upon a time, before I came back to Philadelphia, I was covering organized hate groups in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
Organized hate groups, could you say a little more on that?
organized hate groups like the Klan. I was going
Okay.
to Klan
Okay.
meeting,
Oh, wow. Okay.
which is its own brand of wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But but you make a good point about how separation seems to be the modus operandi and how it's been working for as long as it has. I guess my question is, are you optimistic that we may be finally at the point where we're like, you know something? These folks are kind of show. I mean, when you have an administration that's like got a billionaire basically, making it so you may not be able to open Independence Hall on 4th of July because all the park workers have been cut. Are you optimistic that, this might be the time where we're like, okay, let's stop allowing this?
We have to be. We have to be. There's no choice there. You have to be optimistic that people will shaken up and they will be ready to rile up. We have to be. There's no choice. Yeah.
Now, in terms of Philadelphia, one of the things that the immigrant population here has been waiting for is for the mayor to step out and be more vocal about things.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Kenney kind of, when he was mayor, he put together this executive order saying basically, we're not going to give ICE any information on people. We're not going to help them out in any way. If you come in here and you actually find somebody undocumented, we're going to give them what they need to protect their rights and that kind of thing. But they're not hearing the same thing from Mayor Parker right now.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk to people that you're organizing with and they talk to you about this, I guess what are they saying to you? Are they discouraged somewhat? Are they hoping that, at some point she'll be a little more forceful, or have they kind of resigned themselves to this?
I wouldn't say discouraged, it's more disappointed. Mayor Cheryl Parker is not the ally that we thought we were going to have. Like you mentioned, she has not stepped out and publicly said anything regarding immigration, other than I believe she said she was going to follow federal orders.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. When we had that plane crash in Northeast Philadelphia with 5 Mexican nationals, it would have also been a great opportunity for her to say that she was mourning with the immigrant community or that she saw the immigrant community, but she chose to say nothing in that retrospect either. It's been disappointing. I think we've come to the point when I say I say the members and our organization, we've come to the point where we realize that with her support or without her support, we're going to push as much as we can. We're always going to pressure her. We're always going to pressure her. The pressure never stops. But with or without her, we're going to do whatever we need to do to protect each other.
Okay. Well, thank you again for giving us some of your time. And I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, our co-host, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. Now, Emily, before we let you go, can you tell people where they can find some of the information you were talking about?
Yeah. You can go to the I'm so sorry, Know Your Rights cards and red cards can be found at the immigrationresourcecenter.org. There are PDFs in multiple language from English, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, to Creole, I believe Creole, French. Any language that you need, they have them on that.
Right. We'd like to thank Emily Lualua for being with us and Councilmember Nicholas O'Rourke. Next week, we'll have the rest of our interview with Nicholas O'Rourke and Budget 101 next week. So we'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.